Just a heads up everybody, this is a re-release of the original episode, but some people pointed out that the sound levels weren't quite right, so I've gone back, I've had a rejig, hopefully this is better. Thanks to those of you who pointed it out, but to anyone who's seeing it for the first time, I hope you enjoy it. The Great Western Railway has always been well known for producing little 060 Pannier tanks like this. But in 1947, things changed, and they began building them like this.
The result is, well, striking, to say the least. I mean, imagine seeing the same old flat-faced shape for the last 40 years or so, and then suddenly this turns up looking like it's been punched really hard in the face.
Okay, hyperbole aside, the 9400s were 2 feet longer and 6 inches wider than the old 5700s. The boiler was the Swindon Standard No. 10, a modern tapered variant of the old parallel ones. The cab was a little bigger, as was the bunker and the water tanks. But none of these things really matter when people look at the smoke box. So, why did Swindon model the 9400s after Pinocchio's lie detector?
The story goes that the GWR's general manager, Sir James Milne, thought the classic large steam dome and flush smoke box image was too old-fashioned. And he might have had a point. I mean, Dean's saddle tanks from the Victorian era had that sort of image. And the extended smoke box was already in place on the 5600s of 1924, so maybe Milne wanted something more in line with that.
But then again, the LNER had proposed building a new batch of Northeastern J72 tanks from 1898, so maybe the Westerns secretly wanted once more to get their own back over the A3s. Nah, that's a little far-fetched. I mean, who in their right mind would start a war over a shunting engine? The 9400 class was perhaps one of the most distinctive locos of the GWR's final CME. Frederick Hawksworth began his career on the Great Western all the way back in the previous century, working his way up to Chief Mechanical Engineer in 1941. He worked on locomotives ranging from William Dean's classic late Victorian designs, through G.J. Churchward's influential standardization, and Charles Collett's pinnacle of all things great about Swindon engineering. But he wasn't about to do more of the same. Hawksworth tweaked the Collett halls to ease their construction and introduced the County 460s in 1945. So when approached to produce an updated tank engine, the new 9400s seemed to fit with this different approach. But was it really that different? The bottom end featured the same size driving wheels and wheelbase as the earlier 5700 class, while the boiler was seen before on the Collett goods of 1930. In fact, the first of these engines came out between batches of Collett goods, in doing so sharing the cylinder blocks and valve gear with them. So you could argue the 94s were a bit of a cut and shunt job. But then again, combining the best of multiple designs was a Swindon tradition going back to the turn of the century. In Initially, Swindon only produced 10 of these engines, but in late 1947, orders were being placed for the first of 7 further batches. By now, nationalisation was imminent, and Swindon believed there would be a period of chaos that would prohibit new orders for engines. So the orders were fulfilled by outside contractors that normally built industrial engines, namely Bagnall, the Yorkshire Engine Company, and Robert Stephenson and Hawthorne. In the end, 210 were built over 9 years. Having said that, Swindon built the boilers, and then the contractors built all the chassis, so the industrial-made locos couldn't entirely escape getting Swindonised. Despite being little more than a souped-up shunting engine, the 9400s occasionally worked longer stints on more prestigious work. If you were in the southern Cotswolds in 1952, it was possible to find 2 of these working the first leg of restaurant car expresses from Cheltenham to Paddington. This type of service would change engines at Gloucester for a castle, so if you wanted to make the most of this working, you had about 6 miles to do it. But perhaps the most notable work these engines did was on the Lickey Incline near Birmingham. This 2-mile stretch of Midland Main Line climbed at 1 in 37.5. It was previously worked by a fleet of LMS Ginties and the unique Midland 010 Big Bertha. But by 1956, Big Bertha was replaced by a 9F and the Ginties were getting a bit long in the tooth. The Midland 3Fs were swapped out by half a dozen of these Western 3Fs in 1958, and thanks to videographers like the BBC's Railway Roundabout film crew, the sight of a 9400 pushing trains up the hill became globally iconic. Not bad for something that was meant for empty stock working around Old Oak Common. So, a radical approach to a classic design. But some of the changes seem to be a change too far.
The first 10 of these locos were built with superheating, which sounds really exciting. But as proven with most heritage railways, superheating only really works if the engine's being worked properly hard. So not only do the remaining locos not have it, but the first 10 were later rebuilt without it, which means that this one isn't in entirely original condition. Just putting it out there.
Even without the superheating, they're heavier than you'd think. A 5700 weighs about 50 tons. These weighed over 55 tons. And this had an alarming effect on their axle loading, bumping it up from a little over 17.25 tons to 17.1 tons on the leading axle, 19 tons on the crank axle, and 19.25 on the trailing one, making them dangerously close to the castles. The wider cab meant the driver couldn't initially reach the brake handle when he was leaning out, and there's a long-standing debate over the point of these engines. After World War II, many pre-grouping locos absorbed by the Great Western were becoming life expired, so you could argue that a new shunting engine was an ideal replacement. But the time between orders being placed and their actual manufacture took much longer than expected. Hawksworth famously declared that all 200 remaining boilers would be delivered by September 1948, and it's believed that had everything gone according to plan, the whole fleet would be in service by the middle of 1952. But in reality, steel was in short supply and order books were already full. Both Hunslet and Hudswell Clark, who initially agreed to build some of these engines, had to drop out. So by mid-1952, nearly 70 engines had still to be built, by which time some would argue everyone was too late.
The Western region may have built a more modern shunter than the Eastern region, but by the 1950s, a more modern shunter was already coming.
The 350 horsepower English electric diesel shunter looked like a bread tin on a tank engine chassis, had no steam heating, and wouldn't do more than 15 miles an hour unless it was being dragged by a faster engine. But it could still move 1,000 tons. It had a warmer cab, multiple braking systems, and it didn't need 4 hours to coax into life. So there's no prize for guessing what happened next. Dieselization wasn't rapid, but when the final 9400 emerged in October 1956, BR's modernization plan was in full swing. As a result, withdrawals began when some of these engines were barely 10 years old. The last ones didn't even see the end of steam on the Western region. And remember how the BR standards were being thrown on the scrap heap when they were still fairly new? Well, one of these, number 9499, had a service life of just 4 years and 2 months. Talk about a waste. Of the 210 9400s built, only 2 are left. While the prototype number 9400 ended up as part of the National Collection, her surviving sister, number 9466, has lived a far more proactive life. After languishing in Barry Scrapyard until 1975, the engine was moved to Quainton Road in Buckinghamshire for restoration. She ran again in time for the Great Western 150 celebrations in 1985. But that was only the beginning for her. As early as 1989, the engine has enjoyed notable spells of mainline work, including the annual Steam on the Met runs up until the year 2000, and the Met 150 celebrations of 2013. Interestingly, the engine only spent 12 years in BR service before she was withdrawn, so by the middle of her second ticket in preservation, she'd outlived her working career. So, a pair of modern Panniers continues to fly the flag for their class. But there's no avoiding the fact that despite these particular Panniers looking more up to date, with greater fuel capacity and a more capacious cab, the public will always associate the Great Western Pannier tank looking more like the classic, big domed, flat-faced tank engine introduced all the way back in 1904. So is there a place for both of these?
The classic Great Western Pannier tank may always be better known, thanks to the Railway series, the Railway Children, and Swindon's simply not changing their mind for half a century. But at least we've got a tangible idea of what happened next. Most different Great Western classes, like the Aberdares or the Dean Singles or the Krugers, are simply known in model and archive form nowadays. Here, though, we've got a pair of 1-to-1 scale examples.
The 9400s were caught up in a mess of contracts and delays. As such, they barely had the chance to reach their full potential. But just because something isn't popular, well-known, or conventional, that doesn't mean it's bad. Sometimes history can simply be unkind, which makes both of these examples all the more lucky. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. If you like what you see and you'd like to see more, then feel free to like this video, share it amongst your friends, subscribe for more content, and discuss it in the comments or on social media. What's more, there's a whole back catalogue of over 50 episodes of Steam Locos in Profile available exclusive on Patreon. From as little as £3.50 a month, you can gain access to new videos up to a month in advance. Higher contributions get you the whole catalogue and feature-length and behind-the-scenes content. Or alternatively, Steam Locos in Profile is available on DVD and digital download from e-gmedia.co.uk/shop. Thanks a lot for watching, and don't ever stop being awesome.